Hello, my name is Myra and I have been a natural dyer for almost 20 years. I love making these videos because I want to share my curiosity about the world of natural dyes to all of you and hopefully make it feel accessible to everyone who wants to give this a go. So I get a lot of questions and some of them are the same or similar, and I try to answer as many of them as I can in the comments, but then I thought, why not just make a video addressing them all? Easy access answers. So here are 10 frequently asked natural dye questions. Is this dye color fast and/or will it fade? This is such an important question, and this is a question we all need to ask anytime any of us see a dye tutorial. And I realize it's not something that I bring up in any of my dye tutorials, which I feel kind of bad about. So any of the dyes that I do here on YouTube are going to have moderate to great light fastness. I don't dye with things that have poor light fastness, such as purple cabbage, black beans, beets, turmeric. They give really great immediate color that is going to wash or fade out almost immediately. So if you want to do those dyes, great. Just be aware that the color isn't going to last. So speaking of how colors last over time, one of my Patreon members mentioned that she really wanted to see this sweater again a few years after I had originally showed it in a YouTube video. So this was all, I think, primarily dyed with mushrooms, if I'm remembering correctly, and the color is still fantastic, if I do say so myself. The one big change is this stripe right here. So this white grayish stripe, originally that gray was blue because I dyed it with black hollyhocks, which is one of my favorite dyes because you get this immediate blue from this beautiful flower, but it fades to gray. I knew this was going to happen, so I paired that with colors that I knew were going to last a lot longer. And so I feel like that's important, especially for us knitters. If we're going to spend a lot of time creating a project, then we want to use our colors wisely because we are working with natural dyes and nature changes, and so does the yarn that we're working with. So keep that in mind when you're doing your own dye experiments. Oh, and you know what? I actually have a video all about this topic, so you can also check that out. Okay. Have you tried dyeing with cotton or cellulose fibers? Can I dye acrylic yarn? So yes, I have dyed cotton or cellulose and I'm doing more of it. I primarily dye wool because I'm a knitter and I really prefer dark, saturated, bright colors, and natural dyes have a greater affinity with animal fibers. So you're gonna get the darker, brighter colors. For example, here is a sample of cotton that was dyed with black walnuts and a sample of wool dyed with black walnuts. They're both beautiful. I just happen to prefer these more. But if you would like to dye with cotton, you can absolutely do it and get great results. Acrylic yarn, no. It really needs to be a natural source. So like a natural dye needs to dye a natural fiber. There's one big exception, and that is nylon. Natural dyes love nylon. So if you have that sock yarn that's got 25% nylon in it, it's gonna dye fantastic. How much water is in the pot? I get this asked a lot. The amount of water in the pot is not going to change the concentration of the dye. So it doesn't really matter how much water you use, except you do want to have enough water in the pot so that your fiber can move freely so that the dye will attach evenly to all of the fiber. Unless you want it to be really uneven, then use a little bit of water and see what happens. did you use a mordant? And, or what mordant did you use? I use an alum mordant before I dye my yarn. Some people may add alum directly into the dye pot, but I prefer to have a dye bath. Nope, I prefer to have a mordant bath before the dye bath because I want the mordant to evenly coat all of that fiber because the mordant is a really important part of this process. It really helps bond the dye to the fiber. So that's why I like to mordant with alum. Sometimes I will do iron as like an after dye where you dip it in iron. I used to do pre-mordants with iron, but it was easy to use either too much iron or to let it get to too high of a heat, and it just made the yarn sticky or rough. And then I found I could easily just do pre-mordant with alum and then dip it in iron after, and I got the same result. So that is what I use, alum and iron. Iron sometimes, not iron all the time. Mostly alum. What is washing soda? Where do you get it? What can I use instead? Can I use baking soda? So washing soda is sodium carbonate. It's also known as soda ash. I find it in like the cleaning department of a grocery store. You of course can buy it online. If you can't find it or you want to try baking soda because that's what you have at home, go ahead. They're both alkaline. It's just that washing soda has a higher level of alkalinity, so you don't need to use as much of it. And the time that I have used baking soda, I did notice there was a little bit of a difference in the color. So really the best thing to do is try both and see which one you like best. So this next question is specifically about my privet berry dye. Privet berries. What is the reason for the first round of dyeing before adding the washing soda? Doesn't it just give a gray base color that the green has to cover later? So when it comes to the privet berries, it's really important that that dye is alkaline to get it to go from that gray to the green. However, having your wool in an alkaline dye bath for a long period of time can roughen or damage the fiber. So what I like to do is soak the wool in the dye, get it as saturated as in gray tones as I possibly can, and then I switch the color over to green by making it alkaline. When I first started out by putting the fiber in the alkaline dye bath, I didn't keep it in as long because I didn't want to damage the wool, and so I noticed that the color wasn't as saturated or bright. So that is the reason why I do it. But again, I say try it both ways and see which way you like. Okay, next question. Can I store leftover dye and for how long? Why, yes you can. I store leftover dye all the time. I pour it into one of those really large mason jars with a tight fitting lid, and I put it away in a cool, dark place. For how long depends on what it is that you're actually storing. I've had onion dye that I stored for several months and used, and it had great color. My mother has mushroom dyes that she's been storing for I don't know how many years. Actually, that would be a really good video to try to see if that will still work. I digress. Yes, you can use leftover dyes. And if they do develop mold, you should probably not use it, although I will admit to scraping the mold off, pouring it into a pot, using it, and the color has been very interesting. So it's just one more reason to experiment. See what happens. Can I mix more than one dye together, such as onions and marigolds? Yes, you can, and I have a video all about dyeing with onions and marigolds in one pot. Now you do want to be careful if you're going to do this. Like if you're using one dye that needs to be very alkaline, you wouldn't want to mix it with another dye that needs to be very acidic. I really like mixing dyes because I feel like it gives you another range of color, especially things like dyeing with indigo and then doing a layer of marigold on top, because you can get a really interesting range of teals or greens, etc. It's just another facet of natural dyeing that is fascinating. So I say, go for it. Next question. Is it safe to dye with toxic plants or mushrooms? Are mordants toxic? This is another really great question. Generally, the answer is yes. Just don't eat what you're dyeing with. I mean, okay, I'm joking. But yes, the answer is yes. If something is toxic to be eaten, that doesn't mean that it's toxic to use when you're doing a dye, but we're gonna be smart about it. So that's why the stuff that we use when dyeing, we never mix with the stuff that we're going to eat with. And if you are especially concerned, or if you have sensitive skin, definitely wear gloves. You can wear a mask. Make sure to do your dye with a lot of ventilation. Don't stand over the dye pot sucking up the fumes like I did one time when doing an onion dye that gave me a migraine for 2 days. Like I said, let's be smart about it. You're not going to create poisonous yarn. So use your own best judgment. But in general, anything here that I'm going to put on YouTube is not going to harm you if you're smart about the way that you do the dye. And are mordants toxic? Not the ones that I use. I use alum and I use iron. And for now, that's it. So for my last question and answer, this is kind of a shameless plug. So my brother and I created a little movie focused on our mother, Dorothy Beebe, and her role in the history of mushroom dyeing, and the creation of the first mushroom dye book, which was written by Miriam Rice. And one of the most common questions that I am asked is, where can I buy the book? So this is the 3rd edition of the book, Mushrooms for Dyes, Paper, and Pigments. You can find it at fungiperfectdye.com, and I will have links for domestic orders and international orders in the comments below. I use this book all the time. It's got beautiful photos. It's got these great illustrations from my mom. I'm not biased at all about this. So I hope you will give it a try. Thank you again for asking these questions. I was so happy to answer them, and hopefully we can do this again. So until we dye again.